So this is our DesignShop talk where we are going to go over whatever questions you might have. And we have a few that were sent in ahead of time, so I'll go ahead and show those and kind of go through them. And if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in and we'll get through them. You can always email your questions to applications@melco.com. Applications@melco.com, and we can answer your questions that way as well, or put them on the list. So here are some questions that I had sent in. Is there a way to speed through a design while stitching? I have a mascot with a name under it and I want to test the name. Yes, I had actually remoted into my computer. So let me quick see if I can redo that. Or if it's going to not let me because it's already in a remote session. We'll see. Yeah, come on. All right. So while I work on that, Nate, I don't see where questions will be typed in. So hopefully. All right, it's not going to let me. So to go through your designs, that is on the actual machine itself. So what you would need to do is go to, in the design operating system, you go to Tools, Settings, Move. And from there, you have the option to actually tell it what stitch number to go to, what color to go to, those sorts of things. So it's under Tools, Settings, and then you click on the Move tab, and that will let you tell it what stitch to go to, what color to go to, and so on and so forth. All right, so that was one question we had. Another one was every time I open MOS, the 3 toolbars on the top are stacked. So all the toolbars up here are stacked rather than how they want them. How do I make that come back? Go back to normal. Travis asked that one. So you can do this. Drag your software down, drag it back, snap it to the top, and the toolbars should go back to where they belong. It's a Windows thing. They call that restore. So you're neither maximized nor minimized. And then go back to full screen, and it should restore that way. Okay. Another question was, how do I change the stitch direction so it curves? So this one is really fun to do. So I started doing a quick picture here, so just as an example of how you do it. So you can see we have curved stitch directions. So I'm just going to quick convert these over into vectors and then hide some of these things so we can recreate them again so you can see. So curved stitch directions, I've got 2 vectors here. So to create them, what I would do is draw the shape. So you can just use your regular, and if you're not going to use a vector, you can always use a complex input where you draw your shape. I'll do that in a minute. But just for this one, if you select the shape you want first, after you select it, you can then hold down this Insert Stitch Direction button, and you'll come over to the second one, which is Insert Curve Stitch Direction Line. Okay, when you do that, now I can left click for straight points, right click for curves, and that'll allow it to curve around. So if I put it in 3D, you'll see now the stitches are curved. Well, if you remember what I had before, that was kind of more airy. So I'm going to go turn off the auto and put this closer to, let's say, maybe 18. So we're getting closer, but I still have underlay. So I'm going to turn off the underlay because what I want for this design is like an airy ribbon. So you can see now I've got that. Now on these edges, they're kind of, you've got that little connector stitch between the rows. If you want that to be straight, you can turn on Trapunto, and it will force stitches to go to the end of your wireframe before jumping over to the next stitch, to the next row to complete it. So again, how we'd do that is you'd select your shape, hold this down, go to the middle one, and left click for straight points, right click for curves, drag around, and that will give you a curved stitch direction. From here, I can modify that to have like a 18 and then turn off all this underlay because we don't need that for this particular design. Okay. Now, if you're going to create your own, all right, so if I hide those vectors, you can see what we've got started here. So if I turn that off, you can see this is one that I started a little bit ago. And, oops, you know, you can do a lot with the curved stitch directions to get some motion into that and to have different things show up for you. Okay, now if you're drawing your own shapes, you'd say, instead of vector, you'd say insert complex fill. All right, and you draw whatever shape it is you want. Okay, so let's say I draw that. And your down here is your little key of what it wants you to do. And it's input hole or hit enter. This, I don't want a hole in it, so I'm just going to hit enter. You give it a start point, a stop point, and a stitch direction. It defaults to the straight stitch direction. If you hold that down and change it over to the curved, now I can left click and right click around to get a curved stitch direction. Okay, so you can get that curve through there. It doesn't have to be just a straight swoop like I've been doing here. I can add multiples, you know, along there if I want. Let's see, let me delete some of these and let's put it in a different one. So I'll do a curved stitch direction, and this time I'll make it crazy, see if it, so you can do all kinds of things with your stitch directions to curve them. Okay, so that was another question we had, was how do I change the stitch direction so it curves? All right. There was a question, how do I customize the drop down in my hoop list? I don't like to see all the hoops there. Okay, I just want to see the hoops I own. So I have all my machines personally set up that way. So what you would do is you come over here and you go to, what is it? Tools, hoop setup, and this is the same on the OS. You go to the hoop setup. From hoop setup, you get your hoop manager. Okay, now in DesignShop, there's another way to get to that. This little hoop icon, if you right click on it, it will bring up your hoop manager. So it takes you to the same spot. Right here, you see the customize hoop list. If you click on that one, it'll give you all the hoops that are selected. So for instance, if I don't want, let's say I only want just a few hoops, not all these strap clamps or any of that sort of thing, I can turn them off and only turn on the hoops that I own, so that when you're done, this drop down's shorter and only has the hoops that you want. So you can pare it down to only which hoops you care for, and that way it'll kind of keep your list smaller so that you're not going, where is the, you know, the 5.5 mighty inch, you know, mighty hoop. If you only have 4 on the list, it's a lot easier, quicker to find. Okay, so that allows you to just pick and choose what actually shows up here. Okay, so that was how to customize the hoop list. I know when you convert lettering to wireframe, curved nodes are changed to straight points. It doesn't occur with OFM fonts, so it's using when working with EXPs and converting to wireframe. Okay, so what you're really asking is why, when you do a wireframe conversion from an expanded format, it can be an EXP, it can be a DST, it really doesn't matter. It's just an expanded type format. The question is, why is it not giving you the curves, even though you had curves in the original design? Well, the software is just excuse me. The software is approximating the curves, right? So it's got to guess what the shape is that was used to create that, since it wasn't done in DesignShop, or even if it was, since it was saved off in an expanded format, the only data that the software has is this. It's got stitch points, so it literally has, you know, where each stitch goes, and they go from one to the next of connecting around. It has color change information, trims, that sort of thing, but it has no wireframe, no math behind it. So when you do the wireframe conversion, it's guessing at what the curves would be. Sometimes it guesses right, sometimes it doesn't. That's my understanding of it. I can try to get back to you, see if there's a better way to avoid it, but what I've always noticed is whenever you're doing a conversion from an expanded stitch type, so whether it's your DSTs, your EXPs, it really doesn't matter which, it always ends up where you have points, and often too many within the wireframe, that are just not what you want. So there's always some cleanup. I've also noticed densities change. You know, it'll make a guess at a density which is not accurate. So it's, anytime you do those conversions, I always find there's cleanup work to do. Okay. Probably not the OFM fonts don't do that because they were created within DesignShop. They actually have wireframes and math built into them. So when you take them out of the lettering, the the lettering itself, if you actually go into it, here, I'll show you. So if I've got, I don't know, just pick a letter, right? So I've got a letter. If I right click on it, I can go into wireframe editing. So you can see this letter was actually created using wireframes, right? It's got the different stitch directions, all of that. Well, if I go to expand this, so I go operations, convert to wireframe, all that does is it takes it out of this lettering format. So it's not associated with keyboard lettering S anymore. When I go to operations, convert to wireframe, now it's just the sum of its parts. You know, it's just the columns that form this. So a column, another column here, and another column here. It's still, all those wireframes are just broken out of being tied to your letter. Okay, so now it's just individually, the individual elements here. All right, so that's why the OFM native type fonts you don't lose the curves because the wireframes are included, whereas at the expandeds, you don't have those wireframes. The software is guessing at what they are. Let's see, what not to do when cleaning a machine. So this is somehow, you dropped a needle, 16 somehow fell, and then 2 more fell, and I would guess if you didn't hit E-stop, they'd keep on falling. What happens there is on the front of your machine when you're doing maintenance. So let's see. I need to try to find a picture. I emailed myself some, but I don't really want to open my email, so let's do this. All right. So I'm going to bring this over here. All right, so on the front of the machine, you've got these black covers, right? So you've got a cover here and a cover here. When you're doing your maintenance, some of the steps, this is in the, 30,000 stitch maintenance, the one that's intended to be done quarterly. This needle case will move off to one side. You'll pull out 4 screws plus the little screw down here, and you'll take this black cover off. You'll grease the presser foot and the cam on the back of the cam. When that's done, you've got to put this cover back on. If you do not put this cover on, when the machine goes to index the needle case over here so that you can take this cover off, as it's moving over, needle 1 will fall, needle 2 will fall, needle 3, it'll keep on falling because all your needle bars are being held up by this cover. All right, so you always want to make sure when you're doing your maintenance that you're putting the parts back before you proceed anywhere. So for instance, if you're in the maintenance screens, as you step through them, one thing you'll notice is there's screens that with the little triangles and the exclamation points. If ever you run across one that's red, stop. Red is stop. So stop, look at it, read through it, and make sure whatever it says to do, you've done. Don't click past it until you've done that, because those are ones where if you bypass them, something that you don't like will happen. So there's a red exclamation point there that says, hey, remember, put these back on. If you don't, you might hurt your machine. Well, it's because all the needles will fall. There's another one that's a red exclamation point that'll tell you to make sure you take off any clamping system. Because again, that's another reason your needles can fall, is if you leave a clamp on the machine and it hits the back of the needle case, well, it shoves the head off, so then all your needles fall. So just, those are really the two. Make sure these covers are always on, always back on before you leave the machine. Don't power it off and then power it back on with these covers off. You won't like it. So just make sure you put them back on before you move the needle case, before you power off the machine, anything like that. Make sure these covers are on. Another thing to make sure you don't do is don't oil electronics. Seems pretty standard, but I have seen there's a circuit card right behind here, and I've seen people purposely oil it. The electronics don't want the oil, the needle bars behind it do. So just make sure you're putting the oil in the right locations. So when you're doing maintenance, you know, make sure you're oiling the right parts. You always put these covers back on, and there's a sensor down here when you're greasing. It's in the 10 million maintenance when you're greasing these rails. One of the steps says to clean off all the grease and then re-grease it essentially. So when you're cleaning off that grease, watch what you're doing on this side over here. You don't want to drag grease across the optical sensor that's up there. Okay, So that's another question, but I mean, for the most part, just follow the steps. The biggest thing I could say is anytime you get to one of those red exclamation points, stop, read it, double check, triple check, whatever you have to do to make sure you don't bypass it and you follow what it says, because those are the ones that are really there to help make sure you don't have any of these errors. Puff settings. I gotta go see how to get TeamViewer back. Ooh, can I do it? Here, let me see if I can get back into my other computer. Because if I can, then I can show you settings. So the password. Did it work? Aw. All right, it looks like the password changed over there. Yeah, all right, I can't. Okay, I'll have to do that another time, or I'll pause this and go grab it real quick. So Rachel, I'll look at puff settings in a little bit. If not, I can pull up some screenshots from the manual and show you there. There was another question on gradients and blending two colors. How do you do gradients? Okay, so let's look at that. So you've got this mess I made over here. So if you take that and you go to, let's say, all right. Okay, so if you take this, you go into the properties. Under effects, you'll see there's a custom density tab. If you turn on the custom density, you can then, right down here, turn on blend. So usually when I turn on blend, I'll automatically click on another color. And I always do blends with auto apply on, because it's easier for me to see what it's doing as I'm messing with the settings to see if it's doing what I want it to do. So for instance, now I've got a blend. I can reverse it so that it shades the opposite way. I can try different kinds of built-in ones. And what if one's close, but not quite what you're looking for? So it's close, but you want to tweak it some. Well, why I always do auto update is because I can add points to this line and drag it around and see how it's in real time, how it affects the blend. Okay, so you can move that around. You'll see there's a travel stitch here. That's being driven on where starts and stops are. So by moving that around, notice that one random stitch that was through there is gone. Whereas if I put it back up here, because of how it's got to go, it's going to have to walk back down here and sew up. It's creating there. So if I move it, I can get rid of that. Okay. So there's that one. Any other questions that we have? I don't see any more typed in. I'm sorry we had the sound. And it looks like it's working. I'm scrolling through comments now to see if it was working. I don't know. All right. So there's your blends. So with the puff settings, if hopefully they don't kill me for doing this, I'm going to go grab the other password, and that's just in the other room. So give me 1 second. I'll be right back. I need to get the VPN put back on that machine. Okay, so let's see. Connect password is 1Z8Y63. Log on. Woohoo! Yay! All right. So these are my machines on the other room. So I just remote into them so you can see them. So the question is on puff settings. How do you set those up? What do you do with them? Those sorts of things. So when you're setting up your colors, I'm using the advanced interface. So over here, whatever color you want. So this is a 4-color design, and it's not a puff design, but just pretend it was. So normally what you'd do is you'd sew all your regular stitching first. So let's say the first 3 colors are just straight embroidery. Then I put a hold so that I can go lay the puff on top of my design, tape it down. Don't use your fingers, use rubber bands, use tape. use aids. Sewing through your fingers is not fun. And then you would put whatever color you want your puff to be. And select there. Over here, you would tell it what kind of puff you're using, whether it's going to be your 2mm or your 3mm. I think most of them are 3mm. The thinner stuff is your 2. But you just choose one of those, hit apply, and then you go sew it. Make sure your lower limit is appropriate for the material you're sewing. And the hold is just there. The machine will stop to let you put the puff down, and you're good to go. If you're running the Bravos, they don't have these settings, I don't believe. So in those cases, rather than clicking here, what you would have to do is put a hold, put the puff down, but before you hit start, you'd have to come over here and adjust your presets. And for puff, it really depends if you're sewing on hats or flats, but anywhere from, your minimum will be anywhere from 20 to 30. But like I said, it really depends on what you're sewing, so of what you would want it to be set at. All right, so those are puff settings. Here is where tools, hoop setup. So customizing the list, you can see, if I go back to my machine, you can see I have very few hoops set up here because these are the ones I use all the time. So those are the only hoops I really leave there. So to set that up, you go Tools, Hoop Setup, Customize Hoop List, and then you click whatever hoop you want. Okay, from the list. So if I add, let's say I'm going to add a round, apply, okay. Now that round is now in the list. All right. So I think, let's see, did I get all of them? Yeah, I did that one. Speed through the design. Okay, so how do we speed through the design while stitching? I waved my hands at that one earlier. So let's look at that on my machines, which are here. So to do that, you do Tools, Settings, Move, and let's say I want to move to stitch 5,000. I say move to stitch. The machine out there is making noise of moving. It's in the other room. Okay, and if I put it in, oops, I gotta get out of there first. So if I do that, you can see that's stitch 5,000. So it actually backed it up. If I go, oh, that's not where I want it to be. Well, all right, Tools, Settings, Move. Let's go to 3,000. Okay, and you'll see it backs up to there. So you can quickly go through your design that way. If you know you just want to go straight to color 4, you can say move to color 4, and it will move straight to color 4. All right, so that's your move button right here. There it is. Okay, so I think that was all of them. The toolbars, if you pull this down and then snap it back to the top of your screen, that'll fix the toolbars, Travis. So restore it and then snap it back. There was a question about the speed. I don't know the answer to that one. I can't duplicate it. So I've seen machines that do that where it always defaults back to 1200. There's got to be a box somewhere clicked. I don't know where, because it's, you know, I've been to several machines where it always stays at the same speed no matter what you do. You know, you set it to 1,000, it stays there. When you reboot, other times it'll reset to 1200. I don't know. I did ask engineering, so we'll see if we get a different answer on that one, Gary. All right, I don't see any other questions. Apologize. I think it sounds like I'm just going to restart my computer every day before these to avoid issues. All right. Well, I hope these are helpful. Remember to send in any questions to applications@melco.com. You can type